So growing up, I was a nerdy kid. I got my first console in kindergarten. My favorite pastimes growing up were always video games, and my favorite subjects in school were math and science. So looking back on it now, you can clearly see where my path was headed. Being the nerdy kid I was, I always knew I would want to do something with technology. And in high school, I took a programming class that taught me the basics of C++. In this class, I learned the basics of programming, like a variable, an if statement, while loops, for each statements, and all these basic components of programming. I had a project to create a video game, and that video game I created was a top-down shooter. This video game I created was the first introduction to what I could create using programming. It snowballed into the next year where I took AP Computer Science, and in AP Computer Science we learned Java. In addition to having this Java experience, I also started learning about web development. Still during high school, I took a coding boot camp by Cold Steel on Udemy. This was my first introduction to web technologies, such as CSS, HTML, JavaScript. In this class, I also learned Bootstrap, MongoDB, and Express. Having taken this developer boot camp, I really wanted to go further into computer science and become a software engineer. So having done all that in high school, I was ready and I knew what I wanted to do in college. So having wrapped up high school, in fall of 2017, I started college. And this is where the story starts to get interesting. You see, up until now, I had always had good grades by just going to class and participating and paying attention. And little did I know that college would be a completely different story. My first challenge was with calculus. See, for those of you that don't know, calculus can sometimes be considered a weeder course, which is basically a class designed to weed out any student that's not going to be able to make it through the whole program. Starting off in calculus, the teacher made it very clear that homework was optional. He said although he strongly encouraged it and that we would get behind if we didn't do it, that it was completely optional and he wouldn't be taking a grade on it. And in the beginning of the class, I didn't do the homework. I would just show up to class, take notes, participate, and I thought that would be good enough to pass the class. I remember doing this for about a month or two, and slowly my grades started trickling down. I started getting C's and D's, and sometimes even F's on my quizzes we would take in class. Knowing this, I now started to get pressured to start doing my homework. But the thing about calculus is everything builds on itself. So because I hadn't been doing the previous homework, I was now starting to get behind, and the new material was getting a lot more confusing for me. So the midterm was coming around, and I had only recently started doing my homework, and I had only recently started trying hard to understand all the concepts. Now keep in mind, because the professor didn't take homework as a grade, he relied heavily on exams and quizzes for our grades. This was also something that was very different from high school, where you'd have a lot of classwork and homework that you would turn in and get a grade on. So as the midterm came around, I remember studying very, very hard, taking off a week of work just to study and make sure I was ready for this midterm. And when I was studying, I started to realize just how far behind I actually was. None of the book made sense. Everything I thought I knew was wrong. The YouTube videos I looked up made no sense. I basically had to start teaching myself from day one until the point I was at in my midterm. So the midterm came. Needless to say, I did not do good on it. When I finished the test, I remember being devastated, going to the parking lot, sitting in my car and crying, thinking that I had failed and I was not going to be able to recover, and I wasn't going to be able to graduate college, and all my hopes and dreams were ruined, all because I hadn't done good on this midterm. And at this point, I started to have the conversation with my friends and family of whether I should drop this class or if I should continue. In the back of my mind, I don't know why, it may be social pressure or anxiety, but I felt that if I dropped this class, I was not going to be able to continue with this engineering degree. And my sisters, who had gone to college before, told me that I had to keep going, to not give up until the final, because although at the time I had a D in the class, I really only needed a C to pass and continue taking a harder class. On the quizzes, I was still getting D's and C's and sometimes even F's. And I started getting frustrated because I was doing the homeworks and I was looking up videos and I was taking notes in class and participating, and yet my grade still wasn't going up. But regardless, as the semester continued and I started heading towards the final, I started to get more and more nervous and anxious. Had a very middle of the road D that I needed to get up to a C. And the way the final was weighed, I needed to get a mid C to pass the class. Again, I took a week off of work to study and try my very, very best. During this week, I reviewed the whole book, front to back. I did as many problems as I possibly could. I looked up as many videos as possible, trying to understand everything I had gaps in, but yet I still wasn't confident at all. Until this point, this had been the most stressful class I had ever taken. I had no idea college was going to be this hard, and frankly, I was thinking maybe I should switch majors. But regardless, I went and took the final, knowing I wasn't very well prepared and that C was most likely not coming. Now, there's another thing in calculus tests that you can get partial credit for showing your work even if you arrive at the wrong answer. But even then, I was thinking there's no chance I had the C I needed. So again, I remember being devastated, going home, crying, and knowing I had failed. Telling my parents I would have to retake calculus and that this was a very hard major and I don't know if I wanted to continue with it. But they were disappointed but also comforting and telling me that next time it would be easier and there's no way I would fail it a second time, having put in all the effort I put in the first time. So I remember waiting for my final grade, hoping and praying that some miracle had happened and I had maybe gotten the 75 I needed. On that Friday, I was refreshing my email until I finally had a test result, and my test result was a 67. It was just barely low enough to not get the C I needed. So at this point, I was even more sad, thinking I had almost done it. I had almost gotten the C I needed, but because I had been so slow to adapt to college and to the way I needed to do my homework and study, I had to retake this class the next semester. I tried emailing and I tried calling the professor to see if there's any way I could do some extra credit or have him curve the grade, but he did not respond. Because he didn't respond, I thought for sure I had failed. So on Tuesday, when I checked my transcript to make sure all my other classes were good, I noticed that I had a C in calculus. So this brings me to another thing I discovered about college, is that sometimes professors will curve final grades. And I didn't know this was a possibility until this point in my college career. Either that or he had a big liking for me, I don't know. Regardless, this taught me a big lesson that some classes were going to be harder than others, and I will need to dedicate more time to these classes, make sure I do my optional homework, and make sure I understand that homework and study well for my quizzes and tests. So, having passed Calculus 1, the next semester I enrolled in Calculus 2, and having learned all the tips I shared before, as well as having the pressure to not let myself get into that situation again, I actually ended up getting an A in Calculus 2, and it was one of my biggest achievements in my whole college career, if I'm being honest. So that was my first year in college. So this leads us to June of 2018, when I was in summer break between my first year and second year of college. See, I used to wear glasses, and obviously, as anyone who wears glasses knows, you have to go and get an eye exam every year to make sure your prescription is still good. So in June of 2018, I went to the eye doctor, and when he told me to cover my right eye and tell him what letters I saw with only my left eye, I couldn't see anything past the biggie. This was a bit concerning for him and for me as well, so he ordered that I go see a specialist. In the meantime, I tried to forget about it. I didn't do much research into what it could be, and because I was seeing fine using both eyes, I didn't give it much thought and thought maybe the eye specialist is going to find some easy fix for it. So the fall semester started in college in 2018, and this semester I didn't have too many hard classes. I think the hardest class I had was chemistry, but regardless, soon into the start of my semester, I had to go and get this eye exam from this specialist. So I went and did the test with the doctor, and he found that my left eye peripheral vision was not very good. So the doctor was rightfully concerned, and he thought it might be an issue with my eye that he didn't have the right machinery to detect. So he sent me to the state capitol to have a more in-depth eye exam to make sure that my eyeball itself was completely healthy and it wasn't an issue with my eye. So I continued with my coursework until that appointment came up, and I remember that appointment being in November. So I went and I took the eye exam. They gave me these things to keep my eyes open and put me through this machine to check and make sure my eyeball itself was perfectly healthy. So after the test, in about 1 or 2 days, I heard back from the doctor that he wanted to do a visit with me to talk about my results. So by end of November or December, I went and met with the doctor. He said, your eye is perfectly healthy, and now the bad news is you most likely have a brain tumor. He said, I don't know for sure yet. We're gonna need to have an MRI for this, but I'm thinking you're gonna have a brain tumor that's affecting your optic nerve. And then he proceeded to recommend me to a neurologist, and he scheduled an MRI for me to have this checked. As you can imagine, this was very hard news to take in, and I was devastated. I thought brain tumors, you had to have headaches, loss of balance, and things like this. Never did I think my eye issue could end up being a brain tumor. But regardless, there was no way but forward, so I went to have my MRI taken, and then with the neurologist to see the result of the MRI and have them explained to me. So by this time, I had finished fall semester. As I mentioned, that semester didn't have too many difficult classes, and I passed pretty comfortably. So the appointment came about January of 2019, and I went to the doctor to see what my MRI results were. And as the doctor started to explain that the tumor I had was about the size of a golf ball, he said that the tumor was wrapped around my artery and my optic nerve, and that if he were to operate, it would be a very risky operation where he could obviously either cut my optic nerve or my artery, and it would be very risky for him to try to operate. However, he gave me good news that there is a drug I can take to reduce the size of the tumor and get back to normal. The drug was called cabergoline. I would take it twice a month for the rest of my life, and that would shrink my tumor and keep it from regrowing. So having this news, I had mixed feelings. On the one hand, I was so sad that I had a big tumor that was inoperable, and I would have to deal with this for the rest of my life. And on the other hand, I was happy and hopeful because of this drug. As the semester started, I again tried not to focus too much on this and just started taking my medicine and continued with my education and my work. The spring of 2019 semester was also not very difficult. It was my last semester at community college, so I was excited to finish it and then continue on to the university. And as the semester continued, I continued taking these pills and getting my lab work and my MRIs taken. The problem was I wasn't seeing many results. By the end of the semester, I had finished with college, had passed all my classes again, and I was ready to go into the university. And I went and I did my MRI test, and my tumor had not shrunken at all after 6 months of regularly using my cabergoline. So in the summer, my doctor asked that I double my dosage to try and get this tumor to come down a bit. He said that with doubling the dosage, it should start to get smaller, and if not, we will see what other options we can take in the future. I continued taking the dosage he asked me to, and the fall semester came around, and I was finally going to the university. So a lot of the classes I was taking in the fall of 2019 were geared towards computer science students. But the one class that never fails, that every engineering student has to take, is math. And in this year, I had another very hard math class, which was called discrete math. And this was my first experience of going into a final, needing a C to pass, and actually achieving it. Now, at this point in my college career, I understood that no matter how hard you try sometimes, you're going to get into that situation where you need to clutch out that final. That being said, you also have to put in the work during the semester so that you're not a lost cause by the time the final comes. So the fall semester ended, and I had passed all my classes again, and I had a doctor visit coming up with my neurologist. Subconsciously, I was hopeful that by now my tumor had shrunk. However, the doctor had other news. After looking at the MRI, the doctor said the tumor had no sign of shrinking. So although he had previously mentioned that the surgery would be too risky and he would not do it, he now mentioned that there is a doctor in our state capital that could do the operation and is world renowned for doing these kinds of operations. Again, this was a very hard pill to swallow because I didn't even understand there was a possibility for a surgery. I thought the cabergoline had to work, and I was very sad that now I had to undergo a surgery. So the spring semester started, And I had some very difficult classes this semester. I had 2 math classes I was trying to take at the same time, and I knew I had to try very, very hard in order to pass both these classes. And in the middle of it, I had this doctor's appointment looming. So in mid-February, I had the doctor's appointment with the surgeon that was going to operate on me. And as expected, he explained all the risks and he explained the procedure. He said it would be about a 4-hour surgery. I would be at the hospital for about a week. I wouldn't be able to do any physical labor for 2 to 3 months after surgery. And he'd go in through the side of my skull. He wouldn't be able to go through my nose because the tumor was so big. And he wanted to do it as soon as possible. Now keep in mind this was in February and the semester had just started and I didn't want to have to drop my classes. Additionally, I had scholarships that I didn't want to lose by taking time off of school to have the surgery. I explained to the doctor that I understand he wants it as soon as possible, but can we do it after my semester ends? He got very mad at me, telling me that my health is very important, that school will always be there, and if I didn't have my health, then what good is a degree anyway? Explained to him that although I understand his concern, I had this tumor for a very long time and it hadn't grown. He begrudgingly accepted and had my surgery scheduled for May 15th. Now, as fate would have it, there was a little virus going around that would cause the whole world to shut down in March. We were told that we would continue school remotely, that campus was shut down, and working from home and going to school from home was going to be the way forward. At this time also, hospitals had their selective surgery closed. So it just makes me think that if I would have dropped out of school to have my surgery in March, it may have not even happened. So I'm so glad I was able to convince the doctor to have my surgery scheduled for May 15th. So as I mentioned, school continued online at this point, and switching to online learning made everything a lot harder on me. So as I mentioned, I was taking 2 very hard math classes, which I was struggling to keep up with as it was, and when we switched to online, it became impossible. The class was called Combinatorics. I was struggling to have a good grade in this class and understand everything they were saying, so I decided I would drop it and take it later with a different professor. So now I only had linear algebra to focus on, and although it was very difficult, at this point, I didn't need a C anymore in order to pass because this was the final math class in my curriculum. So this class I can actually pass with a D and still graduate. Not having the best online learning habits, I ended up getting a D in this class, but nonetheless that was good enough to pass. So the semester finished off, and what came next was obviously the surgery I had scheduled for May 15th. So the night before, we went and stayed in the state capitol. And the morning of, my dad dropped me off at the hospital because of COVID guidelines. He couldn't come in with me. And by 9 a.m., I was wheeled into the operating room. They put a gas mask on me. And the next thing I remember was, "Osman, wake up! Osman, wake up!" Just like that, the surgery was done. As the doctor had mentioned, I was at the hospital for 6 days, but for the most part, I don't remember much of it, other than my dad coming to visit me for about 30 minutes every day. Because of the COVID guidelines, that's all they would allow him, and a lot of the time, he would just watch me sleep because I wouldn't have enough energy to even talk to him. But after the 6 days, I was released from the hospital, but the surgery had been a success and about 99% of my tumor had been removed. There was still a very small part of my tumor that was still left that I would later need to get radiation for. However, for the most part, the doctor had done a great job and my tumor was successfully removed. So this was in May, so I still had the whole summer to recover, but I wasn't able to do much and my energy levels were super low. In addition to it being COVID, where you were supposed to stay home and not go anywhere. As I mentioned before, having classes online made it way easier for me to skip, and having low motivation, that's exactly what I did. A lot of the times I'd put the lecture on and put a live stream on next to it and watch both at the same time, trying to absorb what the professor was saying, but knowing full well that I wasn't. And other times I would completely skip class, thinking I would catch the recording later and would never come back to it. So these things made it very difficult, and when my homework was due, I would go back and skim and scan the lectures and try to pick up what I needed just to complete the homework. This was a very, very dark time, and I'm glad it's over. Using these methods, I guess you can call them, ended up passing my classes. Finally, I had one semester left and I would finally become a software engineer. So as the 2021 spring semester started, I knew I had to start applying for jobs. The company I really wanted to work for was the one I had previously been working for. So when their career fair came up, I was sure to attend. It was during COVID, so they were virtual career fairs. I bought a good webcam, I bought some good lighting, I bought a dress shirt and a tie and some good sweatpants, and I was ready to attend my Zoom meetings. So I attended the career fairs and talked to the recruiters and told them I'm very interested in working with them. And this is how I was able to set up my first job interview. So at this company, they have a 3-round interview process where the first round is just a kind of survey, like what would you do in certain situations? Like if a customer was yelling at you, what would you do? Things like this. And I'm not sure if a person grades them or it's just automated process. And luckily I was selected to do the second round interview. So for the second round interview, I remember them asking me to create a GitHub UI, basically, given their GitHub API. And for me, this was something that was very simple. I mean, it was something that I had done a lot of times before. So I was excited to get this done. I remember staying up all night, making it as pretty as I possibly could. And I remember my interview was exactly at 12 p.m. So I was working up until the last minute, and I remember it freezing on me around 11:45. It said the API cannot be accessed. Very stressed out, I still hopped onto the Zoom call and I explained to the interviewer that my API was locked and it was working fine all night, and I ran them through the code and I explained to them what the web page looked like. However, obviously there was no way for them to see it and they had no idea if I was telling them the truth or not. So after the interview, I was devastated. So very, very sad. I went to sleep thinking I had bombed my second round interview. So around 6 p.m. I woke up from a nap and I went to my computer just to check if the API was working now. And it was. So at this time I had an epiphany. I could create a video for them showing them what the UI looked like, explain to them that I hadn't touched this since the interview, and hopefully they believed me. And to my surprise, I got the third round interview. Now in the third round of interviews, you're giving a coding challenge. You would show them your editor and go through the code as you try to solve the problem. The third interview came. I'll put up the exact link code question, but basically I knew at that time I needed to do something to do with dynamic programming. So I went through and explained what the code should do, how it should work, but at the time I was not able to actually code it and have it running. But I think the interviewer was impressed enough, and I think my code was only off by a little bit. So I got my job offer in about February or March, and I signed it. My job would start in July of that year. All I had to do now was finish my degree, which is easier said than done. You see, the problem was I still carrying on the same bad habits of the semester prior, where I would skip class and try to catch up on the recordings. So by the time midterms came, I was struggling in about 3 different classes, one of which I was completely failing. That class was artificial intelligence. This was a very big stress because I knew I needed to pass this class in order to get my job in July. I remember getting the midterm, looking through the problems, closing out of the email, and dropping out of that class instantly. Now at this point, I thought I would have to take this class in the fall semester because it wasn't offered during the summer. I emailed my advisor telling him I had dropped and that the class was not offered in the summer. To my surprise, he answered back that same day. I can actually substitute a business elective for a computer science elective, and that a business elective is offered in the summer. Call it luck, but if I passed the classes I was taking, I would be able to take that business class in June and start my job in July. So as the semester came to an end, I had 4 classes I was taking at the time, 2 of which I was passing with no problems, and 2 of which I had D's in. So I needed to bump at least one of these to a C. So I went through the old song and dance, studied very hard, and with the help of Nesso Academy on YouTube, I was able to pass the final with a B, which bumped up my grade to a C, and I had passed my spring semester. All that was left now was to finish off this entrepreneurship business class, which ended up being the easiest class I've ever taken, and I was now a software engineer. My first ever video, and it was very hard for me to talk to a camera. If you guys enjoyed, make sure to hit the like button. Comment any ideas for another video, any questions you've had during this video, go ahead and comment those. Subscribe if you want more software engineer, life related videos, and yeah.